Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever stopped to think about just how much of our everyday communication happens, well, completely invisibly? I mean, think about it. We constantly pick up on complex ideas, subtle attitudes, and hidden intentions, and we do it without anyone actually saying the specific words out loud. It's kind of like being a linguistic detective. Turns out, there is an entire, fascinating field of study dedicated to this. It's called pragmatics. Basically, the hidden math of conversation. So in this explainer, we're going to uncover exactly how we manage to communicate so much more than what we literally say.
To do that, here is our roadmap. We'll kick things off with the unspoken communication rules, then move into the 4 maxims. After that, we'll look at hedging and opting out, do a little reading between the lines, explore the language of scales, and finally wrap the whole thing up with word-specific hidden meanings. Let's get right to it.
Section 1. The unspoken communication rules, or decoding what people really mean.
Every single daily conversation we have actually relies on this invisible framework of cooperation. Honestly, if we didn't assume the person we were talking to was collaborating with us, our everyday chats would literally fall apart. To show you what I mean, consider this classic scenario from our source text. A man walks up to a woman sitting on a park bench. There's a large dog lying on the ground right in front of her. The man asks, "Does your dog bite?" The woman simply says, "No." So the man reaches down to pet the dog and bam, the dog immediately bites his hand. The man yells, "You said your dog doesn't bite." And the woman calmly replies, "He doesn't, but that's not my dog." It's a great joke, right? But why is it funny? Well, the humor relies entirely on the stark difference between a purely literal interpretation of words and a human contextual interpretation. The man assumed that because they were looking at the very same dog, her no applied to that specific dog. By giving a technically true but deeply unhelpful answer, she provided way less information than expected. She broke our unstated expectation of cooperation.
And this brings us to an absolutely crucial concept. The problem our guy on the bench faced was assuming that more was communicated than was actually said. In the linguistics world, this extra hidden meaning that we calculate in our heads when someone speaks is called an implicature. It's the perfect example of how we communicate vastly more information than just the literal words coming out of our mouths. And frankly, it's exactly why we sometimes get into massive arguments when text messages or emails are completely misunderstood. But here's the catch. To even interpret an implicature, we first have to assume a basic cooperative principle is running in the background.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 2. The 4 maxims, the actual rules of that cooperative principle.
Now, what's really interesting here is that the chaotic, messy reality of human conversation is actually organized into a set of precise, unstated assumptions. The philosopher Paul Grice figured out that when we talk, we're basically operating on 4 main sub-principles, or maxims. First up is quantity. You give the right amount of information. Make your contribution as informative as required, but no more than that. Second is quality. Be truthful. Don't say what you believe is false or stuff you just don't have evidence for. Third is relation. Keep it relevant. And fourth is manner. Be clear, be brief, be orderly, and try to avoid being totally ambiguous. Now, we almost never say these rules out loud, but we act as if everyone is strictly following them. And because we assume these rules are in place, our brains can perform some pretty amazing conversational acrobatics.
For instance, imagine you're at a barbecue. Someone asks how you like the food, and you reply, "Well, a hamburger is a hamburger." From a purely logical, literal standpoint, that's a tautology. It literally has zero communicative value. Obviously, a hamburger is a hamburger. But because your listener assumes you're still adhering to that cooperative principle, specifically the maxim of relevance, they force their brain to find a hidden meaning. They calculate the implicature. They think, they chose not to say it was good or bad, so they must be implying they don't have a strong opinion. Or maybe that all hamburgers just taste exactly the same to them. Suddenly, seemingly pointless, redundant words become totally packed with meaning, all thanks to our unwritten cooperative rules.
All right, Section 3, hedging and opting out. Basically, signaling when we have to break the rules.
Because let's be real, what happens when we just can't follow the rules? We use these linguistic cushions called hedges. Think about how often you start a sentence with, "As far as I know." When you do that, you are literally slapping a warning label on your statement. You're showing the listener you're trying to respect the maximum of quality, but hey, you might not have 100% perfect evidence. Or when you say, "To cut a long story short," you're letting them know you're actively managing the quantity maxim so you don't bore them to death. "By the way" is a classic hedge for relation, warning them you're about to say something totally unconnected. And this might sound confusing, but protects the maxim of manner. We constantly fire off these relatable little phrases just to prove to our audience that we are still good, cooperative conversational partners, even when we have to bend the rules. And then there are times when we completely opt out of the maxims altogether. Imagine a reporter shouting a question at a politician, and the politician just replies, "No comment," or "My lips are sealed." They are explicitly refusing to give the required information, right? That's a massive violation of the quantity maxim. But ironically, opting out like this naturally creates its own implicator. The listener immediately assumes, well, if they're outright refusing to speak, it implies they actually do know the answer. It's wild. Even when we are desperately trying to say absolutely nothing, the cooperative framework ensures we communicate something.
Let's keep moving. Section 4, reading between the lines. This is where we get into some actual conversational math.
And this brilliantly illustrates the algebraic formula of our language. Okay, suppose Charlene asks Dexter, "Did you bring the bread and the cheese?" Let's call bread B and cheese C. If Dexter answers, "I brought the bread," he is only asserting B. Because Charlene naturally assumes Dexter's cooperating and giving her the right amount of information, there's our quantity maxim again, she automatically infers that whatever was not mentioned was not brought. So asserting B naturally implicates not C. You don't need any special background knowledge to get this. The formula just works universally. In linguistics, this is known as a generalized conversational implicature.
But contrast that neat little formula with this next scenario. Rick asks, "Coming to the wild party tonight?" And Tom replies, "My parents are visiting." On the surface, Tom's answer isn't a yes or a no. It actually seems to completely violate the maxim of relevance. To make it relevant, Rick has to use local context. He does the math. Okay, parents visiting equals a quiet night in. Therefore, Tom is definitely not coming to the wild party. It's pretty amazing when you realize that this requires highly specific local knowledge to calculate. That makes it a particularized conversational implicature. And this is literally how we read between the lines every single day. Section 5. The language of scales. Let's look at how we quantify implied meaning.
Let's move to and see how this builds. Notice how we regularly use words that exist on a kind of sliding scale of value. Words like all, most, many, some, and few. The rule of thumb is that when a speaker chooses a word on this scale, they are choosing the most informative and truthful word they possibly can. So if a student tells you, "I've completed some of the required courses," the listener immediately works their way up that scale. Because the student didn't say all, or most, or many, the listener calculates a scalar implicature. They realize some implies not all, not most, and not many. Just by choosing one specific word on the ladder, you instantly communicate the negative of every single rung above it.
But here is the truly fascinating thing about these conversational implicatures. They are completely 100% deniable. Because this meaning is only implied and not explicitly spoken out loud, you can just cancel it out. Let's say you open a letter that says, "You have won $5. The standard implicature is that you won only $5, but the speaker can easily suspend this assumption by saying, "You've won at least $5. Or they can cancel the implicature entirely by saying, "You've won $5, in fact, you've won 10. This built-in ability to be canceled or suspended is a major hallmark property of conversational implicatures.
All right, our final stop. Section 6, word-specific hidden meanings, otherwise known as conventional implicatures. Up until now, everything you've talked about has relied on that overarching cooperative principle. But there's a totally different category called conventional implicatures. These don't depend on special contexts or cooperative rules at all. Instead, they are tied directly to specific vocabulary words. They carry their own built-in baggage. Take the simple conjunction but. If I say, "Mary suggested black, but I chose white," the word but automatically carries a conventional implicature of contrast. Or what if I use the word even, like, "Even John came to the party"? That instantly injects an implicature of contrary to expectation, meaning, wow, we really didn't expect John to show up. Or the word yet. Saying Dennis isn't here yet literally communicates that Dennis is absent, but it conventionally implicates that we fully expect him to arrive later. These tiny, everyday words dictate exactly how the listener frames the entire sentence.
Even the absolute simplest word in the English language, and, completely changes its built-in meaning based on how it's used. Consider this statement. Mary was happy and ready to work. Because these are static states of being, the conventional implicature of and is simply plus or in addition to. You could easily flip it around. Mary was ready to work and happy. It means the exact same thing. But now consider this sentence. She put on her clothes and left the house. Here we're dealing with dynamic actions. Suddenly, the word and changes its conventional implicature to mean and then, indicating a strict sequence. You definitely cannot reverse that order without dramatically and hilariously changing the story. The chronological order matters because the implicature completely shifts.
And that brings us to the end of our exploration. Let's wrap this up with one final funny scenario from our source material. Bert asks, "Do vegetarians eat hamburgers?" And Ernie replies, "Do chickens have lips?" Now, why does this make total sense to us? Ernie is completely flouting the maxim of relevance here. A simple no would have sufficed. But by offering a famously absurd question where the answer is obviously no, Ernie forces Bert to do the math, to calculate the implicature. The meaning isn't just no. The hidden math of this conversation dictates that Ernie is actually saying, obviously not, and honestly, that question was so silly it barely needed asking in the first place. We do this flawlessly, every single day. So the next time you're chatting with a friend, listening to an interview, or trying to decipher a text message, ask yourself, are you actually hearing what they're saying, or are you just doing the hidden math? You might never listen to a conversation the exact same way again.